AMD and Nvidia have released a pair of mid-range graphics cards which should sell by the bucket load, but in these troubled times of limited availability and ludicrous pricing, which deserves to be the GPU at the heart of your gaming PC. I'm Dave, I've tested every single graphics card from this new generation of GPUs, and I'm here to talk about the top hardware head-to-head of the year so far. So the AMD RX 9070 XT versus the Nvidia RTX 5070 Ti. It feels like it's been a long time since we last had a genuine graphics card showdown between AMD and Nvidia, but here we are in 2025 and the Radeon RX 9070 XT is showing itself a true competitor to Nvidia's RTX 5070 Ti. The green team has had it largely its own way for the past few generations, with the red side of the GPU divide only really able to compete if you take out ray tracing and upscaling features. But AMD has closed the gap on ray tracing and has upped its upscaling game, and is now giving Nvidia a very tough time because of an ultra-competitive launch price which cut the 5070 Ti off at the knees. The RTX 5070 Ti definitely has some aces up its sleeve though, and there are some very key points where the GeForce crew can point to huge frame rate leads. So, as the price gap tightens, who comes out on top? As far as a head-to-head goes, in specs terms, things are pretty darn close between the two cards. They both sport their respective manufacturers' latest GPU architecture. On the AMD side, that's RDNA 4, and on Nvidia, it's RTX Blackwell. The chips themselves are very similar in size too, 365mm squared against 378mm squared, and they both contain a whole lot of nominally 4nm transistors from TSMC2. There does seem to be a large disparity between their relative shader counts however, but this spec in particular is where it's impossible to truthfully do an apples-to-apples comparison. They are very different fruits, or GPU architectures if you will, even if they deliver roughly the same end result. There is also a clear divide between their rated boost clock speeds too, though again this is more of an on-paper distinction because in practice, the 9070 XT and 5070 Ti cards I've tested both hover around the 2600 to 2700 MHz mark, so essentially it's a level playing field on that front. Memory is probably the part which has the biggest real terms disparity, but only really when it comes to raw memory bandwidth. They're both running on a 256-bit memory bus and they both sport 16GB of video memory, but the 5070 Ti comes with GDDR7 memory running at 28GB per second, while the 9070 XT is using the older GDDR6 20GB per second memory. That means there's 40% more memory bandwidth available to the Nvidia chip. In general, this makes the GeForce GPU better suited to high-resolution gaming, and that's borne out by the relative 4K benchmarks. Then there's the power draw. Both the cards are sitting around the 300-watt mark, with the 5070 Ti coming in at 285 watts, and the 9070 XT with a TBP of 304 watts. Though again, the reality is a little different in practice, with the average power draw of the two cards actually coming out at 303 watts and 352 watts respectively. The relative pricing of the two cards should be the key point in this whole head-to-head, but such is the state of PC gaming hardware in 2025 that the actual on-shelf pricing of the 9070 XT and the 5070 Ti right now are disturbingly similar. Disturbing because they should be miles apart. The MSRP for the 5070 Ti is $750, which is already a lot for a mid-range GPU, while the 9070 XT launched with a $599 MSRP. That's a price difference which should have taken out the Nvidia competitor at the knees. With a $150 price delta and nothing in it in terms of specs, it would be tough indeed to come down on the side of the Nvidia GPU. But MSRPs have proved ephemeral at best and kinda dishonest at worst. Hopefully, both stock and pricing will normalise at some point this year, but I'm certainly not holding my breath. I'm dreadfully out of shape and I wouldn't last that long. Especially as manufacturers I spoke to admitted that AMD's MSRP for the 9070 XT was only ever meant to be a launch price, and that the card partners themselves had always planned to hike the prices the instant release day was done. So whether we'll actually see any $600 9070 XT cards in the future is looking pretty unlikely. Though the same can be said regarding the 5070 Ti though. The scarcity of 50 series GPUs in the retail market means that the prices have remained ludicrously offensively high, and it's going to be a long time before prices come down. If people are buying at that price, then there's no reason for manufacturers or retailers to budge. Again, I'd be surprised to see that $750 MSRP being regularly achieved at any point this year. Right now, in the spring of 2025, the best pricing is over at Amazon, where it's locking them behind Prime member deals. Though even these best prices have the 9070 XT at the original $750 MSRP of the 5070 Ti, which in turn is $900. For Prime members then, the $150 price delta remains, even if the price tag makes me want to gag. But for everyone else, you're looking at a $900 plus price tag for both cards. Gross. So this is the really important part of the conversation, because the relative pricing of the two cards means nothing if the gaming performance isn't there. But thankfully for AMD, it absolutely is. The new RDNA 4 GPUs have been purpose-built for a price-to-performance ratio that really takes the fight to Nvidia, and that's exactly what they do. AMD has also filled in the gaps where the Radeon GPUs of times past have fallen over like freaks on an ether binge. That means the ray tracing performance of the 9070 XT has been hugely improved, and we're now seeing the first shoots of machine learning being brought into the AMD Fidelity FX Super Resolution Upscaler, with the new FSR 4.0 version. In pure native performance terms, it's really only the super heavy ray tracing of Cyberpunk that causes any big delta in gaming performance, either at 4K or 1440p. Otherwise, there's barely a handful of frames in it. And even that big difference starts to fade once we start talking about the real-world performance, which brings in upscaling and frame generation. If we're just mixing in standard 2x frame gen for both cards and a DLSS or FSR quality setting, then even Cyberpunk becomes a level race. In fact, the AMD card comes out ahead in that and F124, which both use a bunch of ray tracing effects. That is just on the raw number side of things, however, and it's important to note that while AMD does have FSR4 now running on machine learning algorithms, there are still precious few games that actually support it. That means with Cyberpunk and F124, those numbers are all using the original FSR frame generation features, which definitely don't have the visual quality of Nvidia's competing DLSS and more advanced frame gen tech. In terms of image quality alone, Nvidia's upscaling and interpolating technology is still well in advance of AMD's, and that's before we get into the real magic trick of the RTX Blackwell generation, multi-frame generation. The RTX 50 series GPUs are now able to generate up to 3 additional AI-generated frames between each traditionally rendered frame. This inevitably brings up the debate about fake frames or whether this is actually just frame smoothing. But the end result is a game which, no matter how you feel about what those resulting FPS metrics say, feels smoother and faster than without it. At the extremes of performance, when the input frame rate is very low to start with, pushing to 4x MFG does add a ton of extra latency into games, and that can make it feel sluggish even if the frame rate is presented as high. It can also introduce some weird visual artifacts too. But if the DLSS performance is delivering near 60 FPS, then multi-frame gen can make a huge difference to the feel of a supported game. The issue is that, like FSR4, it's not in every game on the market. Unlike FSR4, however, it is easily backported into games with existing frame gen support, though notably hasn't been ported into all of them yet. But there's also a good chance that every big game release of the next year that comes with Nvidia's DLSS tech will come with MFG as standard. Overclocking over the past few GPU generations has been more about hitting incrementally higher but utterly arbitrary numbers. The end result has been marginally higher clock speeds but very little actual performance gain for the extra heat and power burning through your GPU. That's largely been down to the dynamic clock speeds of modern GPUs, where they've been designed to run as fast as either their thermal or power budgets will allow. This is why rated clock speeds rarely bear any relation to what a graphics card's IRL frequency will actually be. Those older GPUs are already running effectively as fast as their silicon allows, with only very marginal wiggle room allowed. This generation is different though. Across both the Nvidia and AMD's latest architectures, I've had great success overclocking both the 9070 XT and the 5070 Ti. They both benefit from slightly different methods. With AMD's chips, it's more about undervolting and giving the GPU more thermal headroom to boost its own clocks, while with Nvidia it's just a case of upping the clock speed offset as far as you can go. The difference can sometimes mean an extra 10% higher frame rates, with surprisingly little impact on either the temperature or the power draw. That makes it absolutely worth doing, but in this area there isn't much difference between just how far you can push either GPU. I've seen a greater delta between the extra performance you can squeeze out of the Nvidia GPU compared with the AMD one, but it's only by a single percentage point here and there. So this is a surprisingly tricky final conclusion to draw. I mean, it certainly wasn't going to be when I first reviewed the RX 9070 XT. The simple calculation was that you were essentially getting the same sort of gaming performance as the RTX 5070 Ti, but for at least $150 less. But scarcity has created unforgivably high pricing for both these impressive mid-range GPUs. So my verdict kinda comes in two parts. The first is about which card I'd recommend right now. At the moment, outside of Prime member deals, there is actually precious little difference in between the RTX 5070 Ti and the RX 9070 XT. Both are frankly offensively priced at between $900 and $1,000. But if you had to buy one, and if prices are equal, I'd pick the Nvidia card. Now that might not be a popular opinion and certainly not a fashionable one, but the GeForce GPU is more efficient, will still perform better in heavily ray-traced games, has the edge at 4K resolutions, and DLSS still retains far better visual fidelity, especially when FSR4 is in so few games. and it comes with multi-frame gen. Look, I understand folk are still not sold on fake frames, but even if you just take them as smoothing out the experience, unless you're pushing 4x frame gen on a game that's barely scraping 20 FPS natively, then you are getting a far better experience in compatible games than with the Radeon card. This is not going to be the situation forever though. Someday there will be cards available at closer to MSRP, and when stock normalises, it'll be hard to look past a considerably cheaper RX 9070 XT. Away from the currently offensive GPU pricing, the fact that the RDNA 4 card is so competitive with the 5070 Ti, with such good price performance numbers, then the smart money will pick the AMD card all day long. It is a great gaming GPU and can undervolt like a champ. You don't need a fancy factory overclocked card to do it either. AMD has made a fantastic card that deserves to do well, if only that price can properly start to normalise. So there you have it! If they're currently level on pricing, go green, and if the current pricing and stock levels normalise, it's got to be red team all the way. Both the RX 9070 XT and the RTX 5070 Ti are great graphics cards however, with only the marketing, the scalping and the price gouging letting the hardware down. Anyways, enough of this old man shouting at the ephemeral concept of MSRPs and that damn GPUs never used to cost this much when I were a boy. And I'll let you get on with your day, safe in the knowledge that I've done my best to help. I hope you found this useful, or at least kind of interesting, and please do all the likey, subscribey things, and check out PCGamer.com because we still like to write actual words about all kinds of PC gaming and hardware things over there. And come back here to check out more video fun times in the future. Goodbye!